We will now change gears and talk about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy refers to the taxing and spending policies of the government. A government can influence the following aspects of the economy: the overall level of aggregate demand in an economy and hence the level of economic activity, and this generally is the primary objective of fiscal policy. Secondary objectives, which are often tied to the political ideology of the government, relate to distribution of income and wealth among different segments of the population and allocation of resources between different sectors and economic agents. There are three subsections that we will talk about. The first one is roles and objectives of fiscal policy tools and the macroeconomy, and finally fiscal policy implementation, active and discretionary fiscal policy. Roles and objectives of fiscal policy. As I alluded to on the previous slide, the primary objective of fiscal policy is to help manage the economy through its influence on aggregate national output. And I'll draw a simple picture which illustrates what our general objective is. We have talked earlier about the business cycle. This is the trend line, and this is the real GDP which cycles around the trend line. One way of looking at the objective of fiscal policy is to say that we want to reduce the magnitude of the peaks and troughs, and we'll see this in more detail later. Here we are going to talk about fiscal policy and aggregate demand, because very often fiscal policy tries to influence the economy by influencing aggregate demand. We'll talk about government receipts and expenditures in major economies, and finally there is a debate related to how much debt is acceptable and whether or not national debt is a good thing. That will be discussed over here. If you have time, you can read example 13 in the curriculum. Fiscal policy and aggregate demand. As with monetary policy, with fiscal policy we can also have either an expansionary policy or a contractionary policy. An expansionary policy can take several forms, but at a high level, an expansionary fiscal policy would either come through lower taxes or higher government spending. With lower taxes, there are subcategories based on which taxes to cut. So cuts in personal income taxes would be expansionary because this means that people have more disposable income. Cuts in sales taxes would mean that effectively the price of goods comes down. Cuts in corporate taxes means that companies now have more money to invest. So all these are different types of expansionary policy strategies. And higher government spending obviously will also be an expansionary strategy. The government spending could be on infrastructure projects such as dams, highways, bridges, etc. The spending could be on education and so on. The question then is, what is a contractionary policy? And the answer is straightforward. It is the opposite of expansionary. So higher taxes or lower government spending would be considered contractionary. What are the Keynesian and monetarist views on the effectiveness of fiscal policy? This connects with material we've seen earlier. As you might imagine, Keynesians tend to be proponents of fiscal policy because Keynesians say that when the economy is in a recession, then the government should actively do what is necessary to get the economy out of the recession, and for that fiscal policy, either lower taxes or higher spending, would be necessary. Monetarists, on the other hand, would generally be opposed to using fiscal policy tools to get the economy out of a recession. The monetarists would say that a steady, stable monetary policy is what is needed. On this slide, we will look at the government receipts and expenditures in major economies. If you have time, you can take a look at exhibits 13 and 14, which show the government revenues and expenditures as a percentage of GDP. For United States, as an example, the revenue is approximately 32% of GDP, and the expenditure is 39% of GDP, and these are 2008 numbers. And what this clearly shows is that in 2008 the United States had a budget deficit. We've seen this concept earlier, but simplistically, if the government expenditures are greater than revenue, let's say revenue number is based on taxes, then this is a budget deficit. If revenue is greater than expenditure, then we say that we have a surplus. Fiscal policy can influence output and can be used for economic stabilization. And I go back to a picture that I drew earlier. We have time on the x-axis and economic activity on the y-axis. If this is our trend line and we have economic activity which cycles around the trend line, then with fiscal policy what we try to do is reduce the magnitude of these cycles. If an economy is overheated, then we would use a contractionary fiscal policy, higher taxes, lower government spending to pull the economy down or to slow it down. Over here, we would use an expansionary policy in the form of higher government spending or lower taxes. Automatic stabilizers refers to elements that kick in automatically based on the state of the economy. As an example, the tax system, and specifically the progressive tax system, is an example of an automatic stabilizer. When the economy is overheated, the output is very high, incomes are high, then the taxes automatically go up, which will pull the economy down. When the economy is in a recession, then incomes are lower, so taxes automatically become lower. Also, unemployment benefits kick in, which means that government expenditures go up, and these tools or stabilizers help reduce the impact of a recession. Deficits and national debt. As discussed on the previous slide, the government deficit is equal to revenue minus expenditure. If a country keeps running a deficit every year, then the national debt keeps growing. A debate among economists is whether or not we should worry about national debt. Actually, this debate goes beyond economists. Political leaders debate about this. People in general think about whether debt is good or bad. And there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says that you should not worry too much about debt, and let's look at their arguments. One argument is that the scale of the problem is often overstated because debt is owed internally to fellow citizens. Another argument is that a proportion of the money borrowed may be used for capital investment projects or enhancing human capital. The point being that we are borrowing now to increase our productive capacity in the future. A third argument is that large fiscal deficits require tax changes which may actually reduce distortions caused by existing tax structures. The point here is that our tax structure is flawed, because of which we have a deficit or because of which we have high debt. So what we really need to do is fix our tax structure, and then the debt will start coming down. The fourth point is that deficits may have no net impact because the private sector may act to offset fiscal deficits by increasing savings in anticipation of future increased taxes. This is an important concept, and in many economics textbooks there is a lot of detail on this point. This point is called Ricardian equivalence. The simplistic point here is that as the level of government debt goes up, people just save more to offset that debt. This is a point of view. It is not necessarily a fact, and economists try this out in different economies. We don't need to get into whether or not this really happens. But what we need to recognize is that if this does happen, then that limits the effectiveness of fiscal policy. The next point is that if there is unemployment in an economy, then debt is not diverting activity away from productive uses. So if we have unemployment because we are in a recession, then taking debt and investing, for example, would actually create jobs and reduce unemployment. So people or labor and machines would actually be used productively because of the debt and the following investments. The other point of view is that we do worry, and the reasons are as follows. High levels of debt may lead to higher tax rates in the search for higher tax revenue. So if debt keeps building, ultimately it needs to be paid off, and it would have to be paid off by higher taxes. And if there are higher taxes, this will lead to disincentives to economic activity, and that might actually have a negative impact on GDP and growth. If markets lose confidence in a government, then the central bank may have to print money to finance a government deficit. So this would cause increases in price level or inflation, which would obviously be a negative. Government borrowing may divert private sector investment from taking place, and this is a very important point. The phrase that you need to learn here is the crowding out effect. Crowding out effect is where the government is borrowing so much money that businesses do not get access to money, and therefore the investment that business make is less than what it should be. Hence, the private sector doesn't really grow. So these are the points that you need to be aware of. They've been taken straight from the curriculum. There's a learning objective that emphasizes this debate, so make sure you are on top of it, and also then do example 14 from the curriculum. Next point, fiscal policy tools and the macro economy. Government spending can take several different forms, and obviously changes in government spending would be one sort of a fiscal policy tool. So what are the different sorts of spendings that a government can do? One is transfer payments, so this would be unemployment checks, for example. Current government spending, this is the regular or routine government spending. Capital expenditure, this would be large investments, infrastructure projects, for example, that the government would do. Generally, there is an economic and social justification for government spending. The basic economic justification would be that a government is building bridges and highways and developing the infrastructure so that economic activity will be higher in the future. The social justification generally is that people who are not well off or people who are unemployed need a boost and need government support in order to get out of trouble. On the tax side, government revenue can take different forms. Either the government can impose direct taxes or the government can impose indirect taxes. Direct taxes are taxes which are levied on income or wealth or corporate profits, and this would include capital gains taxes and so on. Indirect taxes are taxes on spending. So value added tax would be a classic example of an indirect tax. At a high level, you need to know the desirable attributes of tax policy, and here are the 4 attributes that you need to memorize: simplicity, efficiency, fairness, and revenue sufficiency. Revenue sufficiency means that taxes should be enough to cover expenditures. From an exam perspective, I feel that simply knowing these terms is enough, but from a real world perspective, these concepts can be tricky. Fairness, for example, is easy to say, but the definition of fairness will vary. Some people might say that a flat tax of say 20% is fair. Other people will say that richer people should pay higher taxes. That is fair. So the exact definition of fairness is subjective. Efficiency, again, simplistically means that the cost of collecting taxes should not be very high, and simplicity means that the tax structure should be easy to understand, there shouldn't be loopholes and so on. But again, I want you to simply remember these 4 attributes of a desirable tax policy. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using different tools of fiscal policy? Again, this segment is straight from the curriculum and it is just something that you need to remember. In terms of advantages, indirect taxes can be adjusted almost immediately after they are announced and can influence spending behavior instantly and generate revenue for the government at little or no cost to the government. And we talked about value-added tax. This would be much easier to adjust compared to, say, income taxes. Social policies such as discouraging alcohol or tobacco use can be adjusted almost instantly by raising such taxes. So in most countries, the sales tax on tobacco is very high, and that obviously is meant to discourage tobacco use. In terms of disadvantages, direct taxes are more difficult to change without considerable notice, often many months, because payroll computer systems will have to be adjusted. And you probably have an intuitive sense for this. The government can't change the income tax policy every year. That would be too inefficient. The same may be said for welfare and other social transfers. People are used to a certain way of social payments being made, unemployment payments being made. People are used to a certain amount. Take the United States, for example. Changing the social security system would be extremely difficult and inefficient. Take the United States, for example. Changing the social security system there, or the social security taxes, will be extremely difficult. Capital spending plans take longer to formulate and implement, typically over a period of years. The point here is that increasing capital spending, building new highways, for example, is clearly a fiscal policy tool, but something like this will take a very long time to design and then implement. Modeling the impact of taxes and government spending. And here we will learn the concept of the fiscal multiplier. As discussed, the objective of fiscal policy is to influence output through changes in government spending and or taxes. An obvious question that might come up is the following. If we change government spending by a certain amount, let's say we increase government spending by 1 billion, what is the impact on the overall economy, or what is the impact on the output? The fiscal multiplier gives us the answer. The fiscal multiplier tells us about changes in output when there are changes in spending and taxes. The curriculum gives a derivation of sorts, but here is what you ultimately need to remember. The fiscal multiplier is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus C, and C is the marginal propensity to consume. It is also sometimes called the marginal propensity to save. So 1 minus C multiplied by 1 minus T, where T is the tax rate. So remember this. This is the fiscal multiplier. And now let's look at how this works. And we'll do so by solving this problem. What is the value of the fiscal multiplier if the tax rate is 20% and the marginal propensity to spend is 90%? What is the increase in total income if government spending increases by 1 billion? So we need to first calculate the fiscal multiplier. which is 1 divided by 1 minus C is 0.9 in this example, multiplied by 1 minus T, which would be 1 minus 0.2, so 0.8, and this gives us 3.57. What is the increase in total income if government spending increases by 1 billion? The answer is now straightforward. That increase is 3.57 billion because that is the multiplier. So a 1 billion increase in government spending causes a 3.57 billion increase in the output of the economy. The balanced budget multiplier. Here is an important point to note. Government expenditure and taxes go up by the same amount. Here is an important point to note. If government expenditure and taxes go up by the same amount, then the GDP is up. The GDP actually increases. This is clearly a balanced budget because we are saying that, say, government expenditure goes up by 1 billion and taxes are also increased by 1 billion. If the government was running a balanced budget before this increase in government spending and increase in taxes, then after the increase we still have a balanced budget because the increase in spending is balanced by the increase in taxes. And the important insight here is that when we have a balanced budget, then we still have a multiplier. The GDP increases. Why is that? The reason is that the increase in government spending has a larger impact on the economy than a similar change in taxes. If we say that expenditure is up by 1 billion, then based on the example we just saw, the overall output increases by 3.57. Let's say that the increase in taxes is going to cause a reduction in aggregate demand and therefore a reduction in output. But that reduction is going to be less than this number in absolute terms. Let's say that reduction is 2. And the reason is that when people are receiving less disposable income, the spending falls only by C, where C is the marginal propensity to consume. Overall point being that increase in taxes has a smaller impact compared to increase in government expenditure. When we connect these two or combine them, then we have a multiplier of 1.57, which says again that a balanced budget actually can cause GDP to go up. And that is the core point that you need to recognize. Now I want you to do examples 14 and 16. These have MCQ questions and are extremely important. If you have time, then also read through 15 and 17. Fiscal policy implementation, active and discretionary fiscal policy. A few important points on this slide which are testable. The first one is that a deficit in of itself might not be an indication of a government's fiscal stance. The reason is that an economy moves through cycles, and as you might imagine, if an economy is over here, the economy is overheated, the output is high, which means that taxes will be relatively high, the income is high over here, and the government will not be making as many unemployment payments and so on, so expenditures might be relatively low, and we would expect that here in a boom the government would be running a surplus. On the other hand, let's say that we are in a recession year such as 2008, for example, in the United States, and then incomes are low, so taxes will be relatively low, unemployment payments. So here we would expect a deficit. Simply by looking at the deficit or surplus in a given year, we cannot decide whether the government has an expansionary or a contractionary strategy. To address this challenge, what economists generally do is look at the structural or cyclically adjusted budget deficit. This would be the budget deficit when the economy is over here. And connecting this with the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, if this is our long run aggregate supply, this is our aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply over here. So notice that the output is at long run equilibrium. If the output is at long run equilibrium, then the deficit or surplus that we have would be called the structural or cyclically adjusted budget deficit. The next point has to do with automatic versus discretionary fiscal adjustments. We've already talked about automatic adjustments. Examples of automatic adjustments or automatic stabilizers are the tax code. So if we have progressive taxes, then automatically taxes will be high. Also social security payments, when we are in a recession, then automatically those payments are high, so government spending is up. Discretionary fiscal adjustments are adjustments where the lawmaking authority makes explicit changes to either spending or taxation policy. An example of a discretionary fiscal adjustment would be a large program of expanding the highway system in a given country, for example. Now, these discretionary fiscal adjustments are quite difficult, and there are three major reasons for that. The first one is that there is a recognition lag. It takes some time to figure out that such an adjustment is needed, and often the determination of whether an adjustment is needed is based on what has happened in the past. We make decisions about what to do in the future based on the past, and this sometimes is referred to as driving by looking in the rearview mirror, and this can be problematic. The next is action lag. Say it is decided over here that we want to implement some new fiscal policy strategy. Let's say we want to build new highways. It will take a while for this strategy to be implemented, and that time is called the action lag. And finally, it will take time for the policy to have an impact on the economy, and that time is called the impact lag. When we combine all three, you can see that it takes a long time for the effect of discretionary fiscal policies to kick in. And by that time, it might be that the economy is out of a recession and already in a boom phase, and the policy might actually hurt rather than help the situation. Now I want you to do example 18 from the curriculum. This is the final section in the curriculum which deals with the relationship between monetary policy and fiscal policy. This topic is covered in more detail at level 2. Here we just need to get a high level perspective. But as you might imagine, this is testable because monetary policy and fiscal policy don't act in a vacuum. They obviously are being implemented together. So we as analysts need to understand what happens in each of the 4 scenarios which are indicated over here. The first scenario that we will look at is easy or expansionary fiscal policy and an expansionary monetary policy. And note my color scheme over here. The blue represents the impact of fiscal policy, green represents the impact of monetary policy, and in black I have stated the overall impact to the economy. With an expansionary fiscal policy, the aggregate demand is up, so that is stimulating the economy and boosting overall output. Expansionary monetary policy means that we have low interest rates, which boosts the private sector. Demand is up, aggregate demand is up. So with expansionary monetary and fiscal policy, the economy will grow. Both the private sector and the public sector, i.e. the government sector, will grow. Using this framework, I now want you to indicate what will happen in the other three quadrants. This is what happens when we have a tight fiscal policy and an expansionary monetary policy. Aggregate demand down, lower interest rates, which means that the private sector is stimulated. This is coming because of the monetary policy. The public sector will become smaller relative to what it was before, or the other way of putting it is that the private sector will become a larger percentage of the economy. Here we have an expansionary fiscal policy, so aggregate demand is up, tight monetary policy, which means high interest rates, so private sector demand will be down, public spending will become a higher percentage of GDP. And finally, with a tight fiscal policy and a tight monetary policy, aggregate demand is down, interest rates are up, so the private sector demand is also down, and we will have a shrinking economy. Both the private sector and the public sector will become smaller. Now I want you to do example 19 from the curriculum. I'll just make a few high-level remarks here before we conclude this reading. Section 4.1 in the curriculum talks about factors influencing the mix of fiscal and monetary policy. I think this material is not very easy to test, but the basic point is that the mix of fiscal and monetary policy will vary from country to country. In a country where the government is weak, it might follow an expansionary fiscal policy so as to increase spending and keep the population happy. In a country where there is a lack of good quality trained workforce, there again the government might take it onto itself to expand and grow, so we will see expansionary fiscal policy and a larger government. We talked earlier about the concept of Ricardian equivalence. In an economy where Ricardian equivalence holds, which means that increases in government debt are simply funded by higher savings from the private sector, so in such economies it might make more sense to achieve objectives through monetary policy. Section 4.2 talks about quantitative easing and policy interaction, and we've already talked about quantitative easing. There are examples between 2009 and 2010 where the governments in the United States and the UK, for example, printed a lot of money and pumped it into the system in order to avoid possible deflationary pressures. And finally, section 4.3 emphasizes the importance of credibility and commitment of the government. Now I will summarize the main points from this reading. The first part was monetary policy. There we talked about the functions of money. Money is a medium of exchange, and there were various attributes related to money being a medium of exchange which you need to memorize. We also talked about the fact that money is a store of value and it is a way of transferring wealth into the future. We need to understand the money creation process. The fact that $100 put into a bank will increase the money supply by 100 divided by the reserve ratio. If the reserve ratio is 0.1, then the overall increase in money supply will be 100 over 0.1, which is 1000. We then talked about the demand and supply of money. The demand for money is downward sloping, where we have nominal interest rates on the y-axis and the quantity of money demanded on the x-axis. The reason we have a downward sloping line is if interest rates are high, then we would rather invest the money in bonds and stocks, so the demand for money will be low. Supply of money we've generally modeled as a straight line, and simplistically you can see that the interest rate, which is the price of money, is determined by the intersection of demand and supply, and this is like any other market. If the supply of money goes up, then interest rates go down and vice versa. We talked about the role of central banks. Central banks run the monetary policy of a given country or economy. You need to understand and remember the various roles of the central bank. Growth, inflation, interest, and exchange rates. We talked about these variables. Generally, with an expansionary monetary policy, the objective is to stimulate economic growth. But there is a debate as to how much growth actually happens and whether this is in the long run or short run. Most economists will agree that there might be some growth in the short run, but in the long run it is difficult to get real economic growth, or it is unlikely that we'll have real economic growth simply through monetary policy. Low interest rates will result in inflation, and we saw this in the transmission process. And there is a relationship between interest rates and exchange rates, which I don't want to get hung up with over here because we will see this concept in more detail in later readings. Expansionary versus contractionary policy. An expansionary monetary policy is where we decrease interest rates. Lower interest rates means a higher amount of money, and this generally stimulates the economy in the short run. A contractionary policy is where we raise interest rates, and this will pull the economy back and it will put downward pressure on inflation. We need to recognize that there are limitations to monetary policy. Just because we increase the interest rates doesn't mean that the impact will be exactly what we want. Central banks, for example, cannot control how much money people actually deposit in banks. Central banks cannot control how much money banks loan out, and therefore the link between interest rates and ultimately how much money is created is not very strong. On the monetary policy front, you also need to remember this very important relationship, which is MV is equal to PY. This is the quantity theory of money, which states that the quantity of money times velocity, which is how often the money is used or how often money changes hands, is equal to total expenditure, which is the price level, into Y, which is the real output. In the long run, if money supply is increased, then the price levels will go up. Then we talked about fiscal policy, the roles and objectives. The primary objective of fiscal policy is to have stable economic growth. We talked about various tools, which broadly speaking can be categorized as changes in government spending or changes in taxes. We talked about whether a large amount of debt is detrimental to the economy or not. Or more specifically, we looked at arguments related to whether we need to worry about high debt levels or whether we do not need to worry about high debt levels. And I would encourage you to go through those arguments 2 or 3 times because you might be tested on this subject. Implementation issues. Here we talked about the fact that discretionary fiscal policy is not so easy to implement. We have several lags. We have the recognition lag, the action lag, the implementation lag, because of which it is not easy to implement fiscal policy. Expansionary versus contractionary policy. An expansionary policy is where we increase government spending or reduce taxes, and a contractionary policy is where we decrease government spending or increase taxes. And finally, we talked about the interaction of monetary and fiscal policy on the previous slide, and you need to recognize all 4 scenarios that we talked about. As always, go over the summary, review the learning objectives, make sure you can say something sensible about each and every learning objective. I have asked you to go over all the examples, and I will again emphasize that The MCQ type examples are extremely important because they contain exam type questions. Make sure you do them at least 2 or 3 times before your actual exam. Also do all the practice problems. Actually, we have a reasonable number of practice problems in this particular reading. Between the MCQ and the practice problems, you have a lot of practice questions. So make sure you do them very well. If you still have time, then you can do practice questions from other sources. That is it.